1 hour on the ins, outs, and upside downs of raising goats on pasture. A lot of this information will also cross over to sheep, and when it doesn't, we've made sure to make note of it. This is part of the Small Farmer virtual meetup that I host once a month. It's a live stream meetup that's absolutely free, and you can register to join me at the next one at farmermeetup.com. I'm having a 1 hour free webinar on raising, grazing, and marketing sheep, so make sure to click on the link down below to reserve your spot. If you're watching this after January, the link below will just take you to a replay. Enjoy today's show. And that you started with meat goats, if I'm right. And correct. How many did you start with as a beginner in livestock?
Well, we started with about 630 the first time we got them, but we had a lot of brush and a lot of weeds, and we needed to try to jumpstart the whole process. So then gradually, as we pushed the brush back and reduced our goat numbers, then the grass, of course, it was coming better and better. We increased our cattle numbers.
Interesting. So you initially started with goats because it was the best fit for your resources and what you had at the time, basically. And when you got in, how long ago was that?
2005.
Yes, Jessica, 630 at once. Question she had is, how did you contain them?
It was all with traditional barbed wire fences with electric hot wires down at the bottom, about 2 feet to 30 inches. And we would use those hot wires staggered with the barbed wires. The traditional fence acted as the ground wire, and of course the hot wires, and it was very effective. We did not have hardly any to get out, but we kept the fence very hot all the time.
Now you were working on that 900 acres. Did you do any rotational grazing at that point, or did you just kind of let them have at it, whatever they could?
We only split it in half.
Okay.
And then we wanted the goats to go to what they prefer, the brush and the weeds. Then they would select what we wanted to reduce, basically. So we didn't really want them to graze, to utilize the grass so much. And so you kind of let them have at the brush as much as they wanted. You weren't trying to control their consumption or allow for rest or regrowth. Basically, they just 600 hammered it. Yes, put as much pressure on it as we could.
Yeah, so that was your goal. That's neat. All right, guys, I have a question to start out the evening. So I've been thinking a lot about it in the past month, in that it's just as important to know why we farm and ranch as it is to know how to farm and ranch. So my question for you tonight is, why are you interested in farming and ranching? And why did you get into this lifestyle? Also, if you could tell me, how long have you been at this? Michael says, what are the minimum land requirements for pastured goats? I have 2 acres, already using broilers and pigs on that 2 acres.
And is 2 acres enough to have goats?
This question.
That's going to depend on how much you want to supplement those animals.
Yes, right.
Through your parts of the year that you're not growing much forage, that's going to be, they're pretty much going to have to get it from whatever you're going to supplement them with, hay or feed or whatever. So you need to calculate that into the economics, if that makes sense. Or if you just want a couple of goats that are nice to have around, and they may have kids, and you might be able to sell 3 or 4 kids a year.
Yeah. So basically it kind of comes down to how much feed input. I think a lot of times you could look out in spring and say, I've got enough for this many animals, but you have to consider the overwintering costs and such.
Consider the whole year. That's right.
Yeah. So Michael, as many as you want to buy and feed for within reason. But if 2 acres, I guess reasonably, could he just have 2 moms and a buck?
Yeah, and then if you found somebody in your neighborhood that had a billy, then you wouldn't have to purchase a billy. That's going to complicate what you're doing. But try to find somebody that would let you put the billy with your 2 nannies, and then then you don't have to bother with having that billy all the time.
Yeah, that's a big deal. Yeah. Brad says, my neighbor has 2 goats and they need to get rid of 1 pregnant nanny. So should he think about offering to take them for him? Brad wants your opinion.
How much Of course, how much land, pasture, or whatever kind of place you have to put them is the question. And then have you got the right kind of fences to contain them, right?
Good fences make good neighbors.
Yeah. And if it's way out in the country where predators such as coyotes could be a problem, do you have a way to address that? Locking up, putting the sheep, goats up in a barn at night usually will solve that problem.
Yeah. All right, so I think it's good time to segue into some goat questions since people are kind of coming around to it. Did you have any experience raising livestock before buying the goats?
I did. I worked on some ranches. I did not have extensive livestock experience, and I did not have any experience specifically with goats. But I will say that, and a lot of cattlemen will say, well, I don't know anything about goats, but you really do. A lot of these animal husbandry practices that you're using with cattle cross over very well to goats and sheep. And so a lot of it's very similar.
Yeah. And did you encounter any unexpected challenges up front with respect to the husbandry element? Or any of it?
Not challenges that I wasn't aware of. So before jumping into it, I researched and I talked to several people, and I went to several farms to see how they did it, and asked questions for 3 months and traveled quite a bit.
That's a really good point.
To see how to do it and not get into something that wasn't feasible.
So you spent your time in research before those animals even landed on your property.
Yes, and all of the people, probably the majority, not all, but the majority have access to their extension agents, to their NRCS office.
Yeah.
And those people at those offices can put you in touch with producers that are doing things similar to what you're looking at doing. And most of those producers are happy to show you, to spend an hour and show you what they're doing.
Yeah.
They really are.
That's a really good point. I didn't go to too many, but I went to your place before I even got animals, and just ask a lot of questions from people who are doing it firsthand. I think, and you can spend a lot of time on YouTube and watching videos on YouTube, but there's nothing quite like firsthand if you have the opportunity to do that. So what were the challenges that you expected and then encountered, I guess?
The fences. I mean, you have to have fences to keep these small ruminants in. Goats are a little bit harder to keep in than sheep. But you've either got to have a mesh fence, net wire fence, or you've got to have some sort of electric fence to keep them. A standard barbed wire fence will not do it. And of course, your predators, if you have even over, 10 or 15 acres, you're going to start to have, if it's in a very rural area where there are coyotes and other predators, you're going to start to have trouble with the predators. They're going to slip under that fence, and once they figure out how to do it, they're going to come back. So you need some guard dogs or something to keep the coyotes from getting all the livestock.
Yeah. Do your predators know how to work around your electric?
They do, but the dogs are inside there.
The dogs.
Yeah, so they're not too keen. Once they know, and these dogs have taught me a tremendous amount about coyotes. And so the barking and the things that the dogs do, the coyotes know exactly where they are, and that the guard dogs are 3 times the weight of a coyote. So a coyote's not going to even try it.
So that's mostly our predator pressure out here. It's just the coyote. And then the guard dog, this was not on the list, but I've been getting a lot of questions about guardian dogs. And a lot of people are intimidated by the subject, whether it's they've got small children and they're afraid that they're going to attack the children or guests, or just the element of training.
There is actually no training that you do with these dogs. It's all totally instinctive. The dogs have been bred to basically become part of the goat herd. They are as all livestock herds have a pecking order, the dogs are the alpha and all the way down, and they accept that goat herd as their pack.
Really? So they're like, they lead it.
A coyote or a wolf pack. So they lead it, they protect it, they know where it is, and they do it all themselves.
Mm-hmm.
We've had, I think, 10 or 11 dogs through the last 17 years or whatever. And we have never had anyone we have visitors, we have people from town, we've never had an encounter that was bad encounter with people and dogs. We brought our little boys up from babies.
Yeah.
And they were never had any trouble at all. Make sure you get a dog that's, say half grown or 3/4 grown.
Good point.
And you need to condition that dog with the animal that you want them to guard.
Mm-hmm.
If you start loving on that dog and petting him, he's going to bond with the human. He's not going to be the pack for him is not going to be these goats. And so that's what you want to establish. When we bring a new dog in, nobody pets that dog for about a month.
That's a good point.
He stays just with the goats in the pasture, and when we see that he's bonded with the goats, then we can start petting him.
That makes sense. That's good advice there, and that kind of removes any additional training elements that
there's no training to
it. Mm-hmm. Somebody asks, can you safely mix sheep and goats?
Yes, you probably can. We really run goats. We did try to run some sheep, and the pastures they were in were very big. We're talking, 100 plus acres. And so goats typically will drive the sheep. If there's any competition for forage, they'll drive the sheep off. And of course, the sheep then start hanging off by themselves. Mm. And once they started hanging on one end of 100 acres, and the goats and the guard dogs were on the other end, and the coyotes started on the sheep.
The predation came into play.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if it's a relatively small acreage, they'll be fine together.
Yeah, I don't think they do anything that would harm each other at all. So, all right. Yes, Jason says Ulf Kinsel runs Kiko goats and white Dorpers together in a mixed flock. So, and he's got some really good resources. So do search Ulf Kinsel if you are in the Upper East and looking to raise sheep. All right. Jessica says we are wanting to get Dorpers and a few goats. Do they do well together? Just answered that. And what is a good goat to get started with? So that actually gets me to the next question, which is what breed did you start with in the goat arena?
We started with predominantly a Boer goat, and we've over the years through basically through normal attrition, the ones that are successful we keep as moms. The ones that are not successful get a new zip code. So through the years we've added probably just a little more Spanish blood and even a little bit of pygmy. The ones that are successful every year get to stay. And every year we use Boer billies, pure, they may not be registered, but they're purebred Boer billies to give us the kids with the muscling that you want to get a really good sale price.
Okay. So you use a purebred dad, and the moms are just mixed according to their maternal.
They're probably 60%. I'm just picking a number. The moms, the nannies are probably 60, 70% Boer. Yeah. And then the dads the sires are all Boer. That's
a good way to kind of bring it up. You go for the dad on the breed performance, and then the mom, you put a little more emphasis on her overall physical performance. Would you say that's kind of
being able to hang with the elements? Because the billy's only breeding for 2 months.
Yeah.
Most billies can take it. They're not going to get parasites that bad that quick, or foot problems or whatever they're having trouble with. But the moms have got to make the full year and do it again and again. Yeah, that's right. Good.
All right. So there was a question here. Can rams be penned together? I heard that rams fight differently than goats, so we have them separated, but would like to move the rams from the ewes. So I have a ram. My 2 rams are together, but what I did was the old guy, he was introduced to the young one when he was like 6 or 7 months old. So I've heard that if you're going to combine rams, you want to do an older one with a younger one. And do you have any input from a goat perspective?
Well, and it's always bulls and billies. The ones that are the same size can never, get over their differences. They always challenge each other because they always, one gets a little more feed and starts to buff up a little bit, and he's the boss.
Mm-hmm.
The other one, and they just keep on fighting all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have two different size ones, like you were talking, they can resolve that pretty quick. The little one knows, hey, I'm not getting anywhere with this.
That's what it was, basically. They were just friends from the onset, but there was that he was still a lamb, and the big guy has been the boss. But I did hear, Jenna, that somebody actually had a ram that died from a fight. So just
they can break legs. They can, those goats and rams can take those horns. If they get that leg in there and pull back on it, they can break a leg.
Yeah. The expected cost of a livestock guardian. Thank you, Justine, for answering that. I paid $300 for mine. What would you say? Is it going
guardian dog
for a guardian?
The last time I looked, $100.
Really?
Yeah, you can get a puppy. Get you a puppy for, 8 weeks or even 6 months.
Yeah.
They're very prolific dogs. We had 2 females that had 10 puppies every time. In a year and a half, we sold 38 puppies. So short of that is they can overproduce. People are like, we need to get rid of them. So it's about $100, $150.
Wow. Okay, anywhere from $150 to $300. That was probably should go get a rebate or something on my my dog. All right. I'm gonna make sure I get all you guys' questions, but I'm gonna keep moving down. What about the wild hogs in your area? Do they kill your young goats? That's what Anthony was asking.
They don't, because of those guard dogs.
The guardian dogs.
Guard dog will see that doesn't happen.
What guardian dog breed are recommended for? Would blackmouth be okay? What is a blackmouth?
A blackmouth cur is the only one that I know, but there's some guard dogs I'm not familiar with. The one that I'm familiar with are the Pyrenees is the most popular. The Akbash is a short-haired version. There's also another Turkish version that's short-haired. And then there's the Italian version of the Pyrenees called the Maremo. And those 3 or 4 Pyrenees-like dogs and Akbash-like dogs are very good. We have not had a bad experience with any of them. We have right now one Anatolian, and dogs' personalities vary. He's a little bit more aggressive. When he was young, he was kind of a rough teenager. He didn't know his own strength, and he was a little bit rough on the goats. Yeah. But he's a little older, and he's doing fine.
So Jessica asks a good question, and it's probably something beginner's perspective really need to know. But what, in your opinion, makes a good goat? What puts that mom on the passing list for the next year?
She's got to be parasite resistant. Is going to be with goats. If you're in an area that has over 30 inches of rainfall, parasites are going to be your biggest challenge, hands down. You can overcome the fencing. You can overcome the predators. You can overcome most everything else. But the parasites is what is going to give you a run for your money. And so she's got to be at least somewhat, if not, quite a bit of parasite resistant. And then she's got to have good feet, and she's got to have a good udder.
Yes.
And then it goes almost without saying, she's got to be a good mom. Most of them are good moms, unless you just have some weird deal where she's not, but most of them are. If she's feeling good, she's got a good udder. Her udder's not hurting her when the kids are trying to nurse. Her feet are not hurting her, so she wants to lay down. She's in good health. She doesn't have parasites, and she's up and moving. Mm-hmm. She'll take care of those kids.
Yeah, the udder issues are big ones, and that was the thing that I kind of culled without much mercy this year, because when I ran my losses, they were probably 80% tied to how well that mom could feed her offspring or how well she couldn't. So just take those really seriously. I think
Very good, Grace. And also remember, especially if you raise beef cattle,
Yeah.
these small ruminants, their biology is a little different. And for most cattlemen, it's a little difficult for them to accept the mortality rate on the kids. And they're having 2 and 3 kids. So it's built into their biology.
Yeah.
But you do the best you can to overcome that. But just know that some of that's going to happen.
Yeah. So Judah Caldwell asks, how do you keep records for your animals as far as whatever records you need to keep?
I have a loose leaf notebook.
Yeah.
And I record all of the births and the tag numbers. You can do a spreadsheet on a computer, but very oftentimes a notebook in your pocket, because you need that with you all the time.
Yeah.
Is the best thing, simplest thing to do. It doesn't have to be complicated.
And that's a question I get a lot, and my answer is the same. I will keep the day-to-day records with a pen and paper. At the end of the year, I will do spreadsheets for the, who stays, who goes kind of thing. But on a daily basis, just pen and paper. Never think it's
has to be handy. It has to be easy.
Yeah. All right. So, making sure I've got all your questions here. Next question on the list is, when it comes to managing goats, what are some things that a beginner needs to prepare himself for? We touched on the parasite management for rainfall areas of 30 plus. Anything else you would say, get your mind fixed on how you're going to handle this?
The fences have got to be in place. Don't get the goats if you don't have the fences in place. You either need a mesh wire fence that they can't get through, or if you have a traditional fence, it has to have 2 or 3 hot wires or electric fence wires in between the traditional wires that you would have, and it has to stay hot. When you're dealing with electric fence, you have to be prepared to check it on a daily basis. Most days you put your meter to see how much voltage you have on your fence, and everything's fine. But if it's not, you need to get out there and find where the fault is, where the problem is, and correct it so that the fence stays hot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So those are really your 2 fencing options. And then your predator control depends if you have not quite so large an acreage and you have a barn where you can put those sheep or goats up in the barn every night. Think about that. That means you have to be there every night, and you have to let them out in the morning. So that's just part of the predator thing if you don't want to have a guard dog.
Yeah, that was what we had to do. We penned our sheep every night. We eventually installed a super, super tight fencing, and that did as much to keep the sheep in as it did to keep the predators out. I mean, if your fencing is tight enough to keep a sheep in, it's good enough to.
Well, and I think the young man brought up a question about hogs. So with the net wire, you take care of 2 problems in one. Yes. You keep the hogs out and the goats in.
Yes.
Even with the electric wire, those hogs do not like electric fence. And they learn they don't want anything to do with it. So I keep most of the hogs off of my place just by having my boundary, encompassed with an electric fence.
And they can rip up your pasture and cause a lot of damage. So
horrible.
I think I calculated the cost of our perimeter fencing here was probably around $6,000. Anthony, would you correct me if I'm wrong? But to be honest, we don't have hog problems. Our pasture is 23 acres of clean and productive feed, and you kind of just need to think about that when you're dealing with the initial sticker shock of putting in a good fencing, just how much it serves you. Would you mention hooves as something that beginners need to be prepared for as well? I don't know if that's just climate.
The hoof condition on goats is very much determined on the soil type that you're raising your goats in. If you have much rock, gravel, or even coarse sand, the hooves will pretty much take care of themselves. If you have a softer, loamier, or a soil that doesn't have a lot of abrasives in it, the goats' hooves are going to tend to overgrow, and they can't stay like that. I do an annual trimming on all my mama goats. Otherwise, they get that hoof wall grows over, it gets moisture, it gets foot rot, they get crippled, and they can't browse and get around like they need to.
Right.
So That's just a consideration for the type of soil that you're in.
Yeah, the terrain. Like if you don't have rocks, that's what they were.
Here we don't have any rocks.
That's what they were built for, and so they're just going to get that overgrowth. Can goats live without a shelter if there is a good fence and predator protection? So can you leave them out on the open range? Just as a question.
You can. Here's the risk that you're dealing with. So if you live somewhere, I don't think people in Hawaii would have this problem, but if you live somewhere where you get freezing rain or rain in anywhere from, say, 45 degrees to freezing, and it could be prolonged, you have to have a place for those goats. They do wonderful in cold. It can be 20 degrees. We had ours outside in 0 degrees on some occasional real cold weather we had here. Yeah. But it was not wet. They do not do well. If they get wet, and the kids, I've heard of goat producers losing almost every kid they had in one night.
Pay attention to that one, guys.
That's the risk that you take.
Freezing rain.
If you're going to kid your goats outside on the open range, you may be looking at the weather and the weatherman says, chance of freezing rain tonight. Now you get to go out there and find them all and bring them under shelter or take a huge risk on possibly losing a very large percentage.
So I lost 2 lambs during our last bout of freezing rain. I took some chances and left them out on pasture overnight. And granted, they were runts and I was having struggles with them up front, but it wiped them out overnight.
Their body mass is so small with a cold rain. Literally, I've seen them be born completely healthy and inside of 30 minutes, just lethargic, hypothermia sets in and they're done for.
Yeah. So just watching for that, because I think that the interesting thing to touch on with that is that sheep and goats do have multiples, but it is to sort of safeguard against the fact that they're fragile and they are more susceptible. But I guess as producers, we want to safeguard ourselves against those losses by putting these things in place.
And you can have a pretty simple shelter. If you don't have a lot of goats, you can put them in a shelter and not partition the shelter off. Once you start getting some numbers in there, what your risk is, if you have 3 or 4 moms to kid at the same time in a bad weather situation when all the goats are in the shelter, and if they have 2 or 3 kids each, they'll get mixed up with all the scents in there with all the other goats, and they won't know whose kid is whose, and some of those kids will be rejected because the moms just get confused with all the scents.
But doubling back to the kidding time frame, pasture-based kidding, in addition to freezing rain, if you had a perfect day, would you recommend it?
If you're going to do it outside, you better do it after the potential of freezing rain and severe winter conditions. Just do it in April or whenever that, for your area, whenever that's not going to be possible again. And then they're not going to be as big if they started kidding a little bit later, right? Well, they won't be as big possibly when you want to sell them in the fall, but you'll have a bunch of live ones as opposed to possibly having a real problem, a real wreck.
So I did a video, and if anybody's watched that far back on the channel, you have a little bit of a kidding barn and you have some jugs, and so you'll bring them all in and rotate them and make sure that they have done their business before they're done.
Yeah, we finish our kidding in 45 days, we're done. Yeah. Really, most of it's done in 25 days. Yeah. And then we have a few stragglers, but they're all done once they're bonded good with the kids, and then they can have access to some outside shelters, and the kids are old enough for the moms to move them to the shelters. Once they're bonded, it's okay. They can move them in the shelters. But we kid them in a barn and try to keep each mom and their kids separate for 3 days, 4 days.
So that is an in-barn kidding for you.
And I know some big sheep producers, and they lamb inside a lambing barn, and they're done. Everybody's good. Okay, let's go to the pasture.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as I think sheep and goats, well, probably any cattle, that's one of your most high risk time frames is
cattle are fine outside, but these small ruminants, it's just different.
Yeah. Good point. How would you rate goats as far as maternal instincts?
Good. If she's healthy, if she's gotten all the nutrition she needs and the parasites are not a problem, the feed are not a problem, I would say they're as good as any of the cattle that I have. Yeah. And they got to know how to count. If she got 3, 2, 3, 4.
Which ones belong to her? Yeah. It's the same with sheep. My Dorpers are super, super good moms, so never had any problems. What along the lines of nutrition? This is a question. So goats are predominantly favoring browse. They're an 80-20.
Yeah.
If somebody was to raise them on a lush green pasture, something that a cattle would thrive on, are they going to encounter problems with that goat?
Here are the two things that you need to focus on if you want to try to do it on grass. The shorter the grass, the more parasites. Those parasites are in about 3 to 4 inches of that grass. So if you can put them on grass that's 8 inches or a foot, you way reduce the parasites they're going to pick up. And the second thing is rotate those pastures. If you have 10 acres or if you have 100, split it into about 6 different pastures, and they can all come back. If you need a shelter, they can come back to the barn and the water, but split those pieces up, because the parasites, as most of y'all probably know, that is a cycle that goes through the goat. The eggs for the larvae exit in the feces of the goat. They hatch, they crawl up, and then the animals ingest them on the grass when they eat the grass. So if you can rotate those pastures, you've left the parasites that have been deposited on the pasture, you've left those behind. And now you're moving them to a fresh pasture. That rotational grazing with small ruminants is very important.
It's almost like a non-option personally for me. It's like they would all die if I left them on continuous grazing. Is the rotation and water the only thing you do to manage goat health? Let's just touch on some health maintenance topics.
Okay, of course you need, along with the forage that's in the pasture, it has to be of adequate and quality and quantity to give that goat what she needs. And then you need a good goat mineral to make sure that any times of the year that forage is not quite what it needs to be for minerals, they have access to that supplement, especially when they come to the last trimester of their pregnancy. Make sure they have the right mineral, because their body is really drawing, and they will go into it's like a fetal shock if their body is not getting what it wants to, and they're going to try to have those kids, but they'll go into shock. So make sure they get the minerals they need, and the nutrition they need, especially in that last trimester of their pregnancy.
Now, do you run any supplement as far as protein?
Yes.
Okay.
I supplement my goats. It's not a huge amount, but I use cottonseed pellets, which are 38% protein. You don't have to use that high protein, but you're going to have to handle more feed to give them the same supplement.
Yeah.
And I give them probably about 1/2 to 3/4 pound per goat every other day.
Okay. And that is between when do you decide when to start and when to stop the supplement?
When the forage becomes less good quality, like you're talking going into the fall, and most of the good growthy stuff is kind of shutting down.
Right.
They need to have a little bit to make that up.
And does this fall into the context of the fact that you don't feed hay, or would you advise that in addition to somebody's hay feeding program?
If most hay, unless you have some just premium high dollar hay, it's not going to have quite enough of what they need. Just give them a little supplement too.
Okay. So beginning basically after that first hard freeze and quitting once the grazing starts again.
You'll see it around here. It's March, but wherever you live, when that green just comes flush, then you stop your supplementing.
Yeah. All right. And she asks, what is the right minerals or mineral mix? She's seen so many options.
I would get They have, a company like Purina has them. Our co-op here mixes a goat mineral for us. It's not just an all stock. Sometimes you have an all stock mineral, and you do have to be careful with sheep. You can't use a cattle mineral because it's got copper in it, but use a mineral that's been formulated for your particular, whether it's sheep, goats, or whatever.
Yeah. I've heard a lot of good feedback on the Purina. I don't use it, but I've been considering switching for my sheep. I don't use a fancy mineral. I just buy what's at Tractor Supply. Do you think I'd have an advantage making a switch or an investment in a better one?
The co-op does a great job for quite a bit cheaper.
Okay.
They have a goat mineral. It's a loose mineral. I like a loose mineral.
Yes, loose.
And you have to keep it out of the weather. If it sits in a tub and the torrential rains come and rain on your mineral, then it's not going to be, a lot of the good stuff is going to be washed out of it. So take care to put it under a shelter where the goats can access it. Again, especially in that last trimester.
Yeah. Keep it dry.
I've had a couple of years where it just rained, and never stopped. And I know that influenced my mineral that I had to offer for my goats. And I had some marginal problems. And I really think part of that came from that.
I did too. And it was ended up being a selenium deficiency. But last year we had, it was wetter even for this area. But the mineral bucket was washed out for 8 weeks straight. And I had one lamb come down with what was a white muscle disease, and she just needed a selenium infusion. But I traced it back, and I think that was the problem, just not keeping it dry. All right, Julie, do you still give mineral supplements to your males? I think I heard at one time that you have to watch how much you give the males versus the females.
Are you talking about mineral supplement or feed supplement?
Probably both. I guess we'll address both.
I never have any trouble. I just know how much per pound, per head. As far as for the goats, I don't try to push the limit on how much I'm supplementing. I pull back a little bit from that. If it's, so much, it's going to be so many pounds of feed per pound of body weight of the animal. Mm-hmm. And so you just figure out how much. Did he weigh 50 pounds? Did he weigh 150 pounds? And then you adjust your feed rate to that, but pull it back just a little. You don't want to be on a starch poisoning thing. If you're feeding the feed and you feed them too much, you can cause a problem.
I don't know if it's the same for sheep, but for goats, but my sheep are not really good at self-regulating their diet when it comes to pellets and treats. So
right.
They just will eat and gorge themselves. So you got to kind of know what they need. All right, Matthew asks, would you say goats or sheep require more care? Which are more high maintenance, goats or sheep? I think it's a tie.
I bet it's pretty close to a tie.
It's a tie.
The goats, they say, I've not had enough sheep to know, but they say the goats are a little harder to keep in. But if you have a good fence, I think it's probably just about 50-50.
Yeah. I've heard the same. I think that the higher maintenance, I've heard people say that goats have a harder time with parasites.
They do.
And if you do the dewormer, I heard the goats metabolize the dewormer 2 times faster than sheep, so you need to use a higher dosage. The charts will always have a higher dosage if I'm right.
That parasite thing is big stuff. I would suggest anybody who's in a high rainfall, relatively high rainfall area, there's an excellent chart on the Clemson University website that will tell you what dosages to use for your goats, and it has all the dewormers. There may be 10 of them on this chart, and it goes by body weight, and it tells you what to use. Use that chart.
Yeah, and so I think it's really important to touch on it. I am in more of a natural circle, and for some people, dewormer is a bad word, but so is 100% death rate. They
will die.
So, don't.
In a perfect world, we wouldn't want to do that. We wouldn't want to do that. Who wants to grab every goat and force a drench gun down their throat? And nobody wants to do that. But when you watch them die, then all of a sudden you say, man, we better do something because they will die.
If you're a beginner and you're looking into this, get your grazing management plan going. Shop the book at shopshepherdess.com. get your rotational grazing under control and have a strategy for the parasite management. Look up how to drench and what to look for in an animal that needs it, and get that under control, because I've been very transparent on my channel. That was one of our primary struggles as first-time sheep owners. We and my parents especially have a very holistic mindset, and it's very good, but we underestimated the need for conventional management in this particular arena, and it cost us some big losses up front. So I want to caution people to be really careful with the smaller ruminant animals. Depending on where you live, rotational grazing may not be enough for 100% of the problem. Now, it was a tough pill for me to swallow, but it'll do a good portion of the job, but you still need to keep your eyes on their eyes. FAMACHA scoring.
That's right.
It's a brief explanation of how to look for parasites in your goat. It's the FAMACHA score, right? You just pull pull the eyelid down.
You pull the eyelid. Once you learn to look at the livestock, you learn that's when she's starting to get parasites. Yes. But until then, you go by more of a textbook. The FAMACHA is a very good method.
Typically, when I look out at my flock across the landscape, I don't know if you do the same thing, but their ears will kind of tell you where their health is leaning.
Their hair coat on goats. The hair coat is a huge indicator.
Yeah. So their ears and their coat.
Their overall attitude, when they start looking lethargic, don't wait any longer.
Just when they start looking tired, or if there's one that, as you're moving them, as you're rotational grazing them, if there's one that's hanging at the back consistently.
Why is this one always last?
Yeah. And so if it's consistently last, you need to check on him. All right. I supplement with kelp in the last trimester, says Jason, and it's a great source of many trace elements. Good. Thelmarie, how do you put tags on your goats? How do you keep their heads still? I'm a bit scared that the goats will rip their head away when I try to put it on.
Just hold their head tight and get the tagging pliers and pop it in there, and it's done.
Would you say that it's, if somebody's afraid of the strength of the animal, it's okay to do it like right after they're born?
I don't so much tag the kid right away. You have to use, there's a little bitty old goat tag that's about this big for those little tiny baby kids. I mean, to put one of those bigger tags on those little bitty kids, you can do it. I usually tag mine whenever we work them the first time.
That's true, because you do have some mortality.
Bigger, they're pretty sturdy then.
You do have some mortality straight out the chute, so it may be a better use of tags if you gave them a little time. Alexander says, I'm in southern Nicaragua in a semi-brittle environment. No rain from January to late April. Then heavy rains. I will be getting a start this year with Dorpers, 1 ram and 8 ewes. Do you have advice for heavy rains in your grazing system? Thank you for all your great work. So how would you adjust for heavy rains? How would you adjust your grazing system?
Again, you're back to the parasite thing, Alexander. And that is, if you can move them faster when it's raining and high moisture, you're going to break that parasite cycle up much better. And if it gets really extreme and you have a way to let them have access to a shelter, I've got one that's built with big skids that I can actually tow with a pickup or a small tractor. And that way, if I'm rotating to pastures and I feel like they need some shelter, then I can move the shelter to them and they can access the shelter.
Okay. So Jessica, I think that we did address your question. How do you know when they need to dewormer? In a nutshell, check their eyelids. It should be like a really healthy, bright pink color. If it's pale pink.
If it gets whitish, if it starts to looking like gray or whitish, take action immediately. There's also another thing called bottle jaw, and you'll see underneath the goat or the sheep's jaw, it'll be like, why does she have that bulge on where her tongue should be kind of in the bottom of her jaw? That's an indication of parasites as well. And on goats, if the hair looks like rough and not slick, it's like bristly looking, that's also another indication it's parasite.
And then Jessica asks, how do we determine paddock sizes for sheep and goats? We have about 8 acres that we will be rotating through.
split up I would suggest splitting up the 8 acres pretty much equally if you can do 5 pieces, that'll give you some nice rotation through the wettest, the worst parasite months of the year. You have 5 chances to move them.
Mm-hmm. And how long of a stay would you max out at between those 5? For both recovery and animal health.
Here's the parasite deal. If you can expose that ground, that grass where your pasture is, to 90 degrees plus for 30 days, you sterilize that pasture. Anything less than 90 degrees has to be longer. And then if you're down in the 60 and 70 degrees, you might need 60 days or 90 days to get it clean. You need all those eggs to hatch. The larvae come up. Nothing's there to eat them. They die. And once those larvae, those eggs have hatched and the larvae have come up, then the pasture's clean because the larvae have hatched out and nothing ate them.
That's the one drawback to the small acreage with the small ruminants is that you don't necessarily have, well, you sometimes, unless you're super intensive, like moving once a day or something, you sometimes don't have the time for each of those paddocks to get the proper sanitation for the parasites. So if you're on a small acreage, just rotate. Probably, I don't know if you go more intensive. I don't know what your thoughts are.
No, it's a time period for the recovery of for getting rid of the parasites. It's really the time period that you can keep the livestock off of them because they're not going to be depositing more eggs, right? Mm-hmm. So it has time to sterilize. And the best way to sterilize it, if there's no high heat like summertime, then you need some time. You need 60 days if you can stand it. Your worst time, like for instance, here in Northeast Texas, our worst time from March 1st until May 1st. That's 2 months. That's 60 days that I've got to figure out how to manage an intensive parasite situation. Because I'm kidding at that same time. The moms also have strain on them from kidding. I really have to focus during those wet, warm months. And then when summer comes and it's hot and drier, then you knock the parasites back just with environmental factors.
Mm-hmm. David asks, I've heard of using apple cider vinegar and oregano oil. Any thoughts on this as a solution for parasites?
I've not heard a veterinarian say that this is a remedy. And I know several pretty good veterinarians. I think it will help. I think it will certainly be good, but I wouldn't rely on it solely.
When I go into the holistic or like the vitamins or the herbal stuff, I will look at it as an addition to my existing conventional regimen until I start to see the animal respond, either by like a fecal egg count. If you're going to do any experimental with the parasite stuff, you need to keep really close tabs on that fecal egg count. You can do that yourself at home, but that's always what I tell people is just.
And again, he may be in 25 inches of rain.
That's a good point.
Probably be okay.
A lot of people.
If you're over here in 45 inches of rain,
that's
very careful.
Somebody in California, they are in 20 inches of annual rainfall, and they use garlic with great success in their region as a dewormer. So keep it all in the context of how you're farming, where you're farming, and what your annual rainfall is. And guys, if you could drop, that was a question for the night. Do you know your area's precipitation? It's going to help you in a lot of different ways.
If you're a farmer, if you're a rancher, you got to have a rain gauge, probably more than one.
Yes. So tell us in the comments, what is your area's annual precipitation? We are already 8 minutes into overtime, but I want to finish out. We've got some really, really good questions here. Make sure to get yours answered and make sure that I get all of mine answered. All right. So could you guys share where you can find portable shelters and how to provide water when there is no tank available? Maggie asks this question.
Okay. You can make a portable shelter. The shelters they use for carports, those metal shelters, get you some telephone poles or something heavy to put on the bottom of them and make some skids and then support that so that you can pull it along without it coming apart. But you can make some portable shelters. To my knowledge, And they may sell some smaller ones that are like domes.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be very cheap, and they're not going to hold a lot of goats. But you could get a half a dozen or a dozen of those and move them around.
And a farmer used like fiberglass culverts, if that's the word.
You can use
and he has somebody cut them in half and does this for pigs.
Yep.
So
the water is going to be, you're going to need a water trough. You're going to have a water source, whether you have a dug pond or you have a creek or whatever. Or if you don't, you're going to have a water trough someplace for them to water.
Yeah. So I have it's like a 60-gallon tank on the back of like a UTV, and I will just refill my sheep using that. I have a portable solution.
Good.
The sheep don't drink a ton of water, and so I can fill up 2 40-gallon tubs, and that'll basically take them a whole week in the winter. So, but when you've got the larger cattle, that doesn't work so well.
Right. You have to have something that you can manage. Sure.
All right. So we're gonna go to the question that probably interests me most is, what were market prices for goats when you bought in 20 years ago?
We were tickled to get $1 for our finished kid. We were getting $1.20. I mean, you'd come back from the sale, feel kind of beat up, it's $68, $70 for the kids.
And that would be a 100-pounder?
No, that'd be about a 60-pounder.
Okay.
60-pounder, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so any of y'all, I'm sure y'all have gone, this is a great website. I'm going to try to get it where y'all can see it. It's a USDA website. They're not selling anything. All they're doing is reporting the various goat sales and sheep sales for the nation.
How do I find this? What's the URL? Because this is not anything but a nationwide report on current prices.
It's at the bottom. I don't know if they can read it or not.
USDA.
If you put USDA market report,
yes,
you will, and you kind of have to scroll through and go through the menus, but you can find all these on sheep, goats, cattle. It's all a really good resource.
So that'll give you the nationwide average. And even if you're doing a private sale or selling straight off farm, those prices are going to really impact how much you can get for yours, unless you're selling like Champion, something that's got credentials behind it. You're going to have to follow these prices pretty close, or people are going to kind of be like,
that's right,
you're scamming me a little bit.
It's a good register for what the prices are doing.
Yeah. And so 20 years ago, you were at $1.20. That was a good day in the market. Today, what are we looking at for that same 60-pound kid? Okay,
there's the number one kids, and that's usually where mine fall. They're not absolutely the best, but they're number one kids. In this report, there were 300, so it's going to be pretty representative average, between 60 and 68 pounds with an average weight of 64 pounds. And they got $4.56.23. So $4.56 a pound.
And where was that at? Does the region matter?
This is Angelo.
San Angelo, Texas.
This is San Angelo, Texas. But most of the Texas sales, there's probably about 5 good solid, maybe 6 good solid goat sales are right within 20 cents of that number.
So we're looking at 4 times. It's gone up by 4 times in the last 20 years.
For a kid goat, 64-pound kid goat, you're looking at almost $300
per head.
Now, that's phenomenal. If I could figure out how to glue goat horns on my calves,
you take them to the sale.
I'd do it. No, but they're bringing double what my calves are bringing. It's crazy.
Okay, so let's go into that a little bit. What do you think is the driving factor? This is not just goats. This is sheep. Sheep are just slightly under what goats are bringing right now. What is up with the small ruminant market right now?
What I think, and that is a great question that you ask. I mean, it's a crystal ball thing with the market, but I thought a lot about it because I watched it so closely over these last 15 or so years. I think what we're seeing right now is basically 2 things. One, the ethnic groups that want these animals for their food are figuring out how to become part of the market. Okay, when I started buying goats in 2005, there was not a single ethnic person outside of a Caucasian American in that sale ring buying goats. Not one. And in about 5 years, there was one here. And now they're well integrated into our marketing process.
Yeah, because
so that means for their ethnic populations, they know how to get that meat to those people better than probably than we do. And that process is now much better established, well established. So you've got that going on. And the second thing you have is, because I really feel this last year, 2 years, the price jump that we've seen, almost another $1 per pound in price, is coming because the ethnic groups, and not just the ethnic groups, everybody, because of some of the unsettling things that we've been through with what do you do when you don't feel safe? You seek familiarity, you seek tradition, you seek what you know, and food is at the basis of that.
That's true.
So those groups are saying, man, I want to feel safe, I want to feel good, my family wants to feel good. This is what we have as a tradition, and they're keying into that market.
And so there's an elevated level of demand in these ethnic groups who sheep and goats are just part of their life from wherever they came from. But then I think you see a surge in American interest because of the same reasons. They want to become homesteaders. They want to begin raising something that can be a food source. And that's what I see a lot of in that. And I think in that same frame, people are going a lot for the sheep and the goats because they perceive that smaller size is lower maintenance. How would you answer that question?
I would say that if you have kids that you want to involve, which I have two young boys, the small ruminants are much better for them to help with.
Right.
The cattle are intimidating.
And they're actually dangerous.
And when they're small, they're really kind of dangerous for the small kid. But with these small ruminants, they can be right with you in doing that. But as far as for the hours, if I had to figure on the amount of total weight, I've got 10 cows that weigh 1,100 pounds apiece, or I got this many goats. If you weighed up the same weight in goats and cows, I'd have to do a lot more work with the goats.
Okay, that's a good point to
if that makes sense.
That they're more labor intensive.
They're more labor intensive.
But they do have the benefits of probably being a little more family oriented. And that you can get a 10-year-old out there with a herd of sheep and not be too worried about.
And your equipment is not as much either. I mean,
true.
You know, if you only have a few goats, you don't need a chute or special equipment to handle them. You can, I mean, you might have to get where you got to hold them with your hand, but you can do it.
Yeah.
Whereas with cattle, you're not going to do that. You've got to have some chutes and pins and stuff that's pretty, specific for that.
What would you say, and this is a little bit off topic, and we're going to close it out here because we're already almost 20 minutes in to overtime, but somebody starting up with cattle, you can just give a ballpark estimate versus goats. What is the input capital at the onset of cattle versus goats or sheep? Could you give that number?
I would say the input is pretty close to the same. Okay.
And handling equipment and all of that stuff?
Yeah, well, you're not going to need the specialized chutes and some of that specialized stuff that you need for cattle, but you got to have a little better fencing for the goats.
Oh, that's a very good point.
So it's probably pretty even. The thing you're getting into is with the goats is more handling, because especially if you're in a high rainfall area, not so much if you're not in a high rainfall area. So the handling, the amount of time you need, and pay attention, watch what's going on with your parasites and your pastures. So your animal health is, you're really paying attention to that. With cattle, parasites typically don't kill cattle. They put them in bad condition, but they will kill the small ruminants.
So doubling back to the economics and the market pricing, somebody asks where to find this market pricing. mymarketnews.ams.usda.gov. You could also just Google search, what would the term be?
USDA market report.
USDA market report. And you want to look for something like this. It's a bit hard to read as an absolute beginner, but you'll get it pretty quick now.
And these are given in hundredweights. It'll tell you at the top, CWT is hundredweight. So when you look at the price, it's $440 per hundredweight.
So when it says 440, that's if you had a perfect 100-pound animal.
Yeah, that's 440. That's $4.40 a pound.
Yeah. And that's what you're going to, as a buyer, since there's a lot of newbies on here, that's what you're going to be looking at. That's what you're going to be looking at to buy in right now. All right. So last question of the night. Will this market, this high market that we see for sheep and goats, in your opinion, hold out, or are we in for a little bit of a dip?
I think the fundamentals behind what's there and all of the people that I talk to, interact with, people are not jumping back in the goat and sheep thing because they had so much trouble the first time with the parasites. I see a few going in it, but I don't see many going into it. So we have, right now, we have about a 30% or probably between 30 and 40% deficit in the goat meat that we have here in the United States.
For sheep too.
We import 30% of it. The stuff that's imported is not fresh. All the people that look for goat meat, they want the fresh goat meat. So if you're producing something here in the States, I don't see how they're going to all of a sudden increase the production in the U.S. 30%. It's just not headed in that direction. I think we're going to have a strong market.
Yeah, I do
We
too.
might come down a little, but I think it's going to stay pretty strong.
I do too, because I don't see the volatility. I think the cattle markets, you've got so many political systemic factors that just make it go crazy. And I don't see that.
The goats and the sheep go straight from our farm to the dinner plate.
Yeah.
You don't have a feed lot. You don't have a lot of unpredictable stuff going on in the thing, the processing thing. So it stays a lot more direct from where you are to someone's, food at home.
Yeah. All right, Mr. Ebel, thank you so much for not only an hour, but an hour and 22 minutes. Guys, thank you so much for being here. Until next time, guys, I really hope that you will be with us in February. Thank you for your time tonight.
Enjoyed it.